Hey everyone, this is Justin with the plan stage. I was going to spend some time today walking through GitHub and in GitHub's planning features, and specifically some of the automation that GitHub offers natively and then through its marketplace. I recommend watching this on 1.5 or double speed because this is my first time going through this from scratch at least. So we're going to learn together and walk through this. I'll summarize some of this in notes as well, and hopefully with some timestamps if I can find them, so you can jump to different spots that might be interesting. So what I did so far was I created a brand new account in GitHub, which is this, I called it GeoPlan test. And one of the things I thought was interesting reason why I wanted to hit record now is they actually have this really nice welcome to GitHub configurator, for lack of a better term, that is trying to get me to set up and set expectations and kind of create my system in GitHub based on what I want to do. So I'm going to go through and kind of fill some of this out. I think some of it's a survey, but it's interesting they lead with this instead of just kind of dumping you on a blank project. Expecting you to know, what to fill out. So, don't have an existing repo. Okay, so that's interesting. They didn't really give me anything. They just dropped me on the main project. So I guess that was a little misleading. But let's go ahead and go in. So their planning features they call projects. And so it's a mechanism to organize issues, which have been inside of GitHub forever. But let's go ahead and create a new project. We'll call this plan test. Looks like I can choose a project template, which lets me choose kind of from the beginning, like if I want to use Kanban or some automated Kanban that triggers on pull requests. Let's just do regular automated Kanban. Leave it private for now. Let's create that project. Okay, so it looks like it's giving me some initial cards. So this is what's sometimes confusing to me in GitHub. There are cards, but those cards aren't always issues. Now these ones might be, we'll dig into it in a second, but sometimes that can be a bit confusing because they're rendered very similarly on a board. But one thing that's really interesting here, since I just created this, is it immediately landed me on a board. So it seems like it's expecting you to just use boards kind of out of the box. So there's not like a create issue view, although I can see that it's asking me to in a couple places. But it's literally just, here's your board, and sets me up with some really basic columns for that board, for that Kanban board, so do, in progress, and done. I assume I can obviously change those columns, but it kind of pre-configured some for me, which is nice. And it gives me this sort of walkthrough step to card to get, excuse me, give me some initial steps to walk through. So I like that there's a keyboard shortcut. Jumper, I'm familiar with GitHub in that regard. It's great. So add a new column, but it doesn't tell me to do it, although I see the button here. Drag and drop this card to a new column. Cool. Search for issues, or PRs to your project. Manage automation on column. So it's interesting that they promote that automation directly on the column itself. So let's play with that, and we'll see if we can sort of configure. I can create a dummy repository with just some text files and see if we can start to configure this. But let's go manage here on the to-do column. So what it's doing is it's moving issues automatically when something is happening. So this is interesting. So if I was sort of configuring this for a real team from scratch, you could consider using this automation mechanism as, say, like an auto triage. So, instead of backlog, you can automatically move them to a specific column. It's interesting too that it ties pull requests here. So let's see what happens when we do this. This removed from in progress. Are you sure? We'll see what happens. Update this automation. Okay. We'll create a repo in a minute here and see what happens. I'm going to archive these two just so they're out of the way. Okay, so let's look at the in progress. Okay, that makes sense. Should probably leave that alone. So it's interesting that it's basically pre-configured all the automation for me for the to-do, doing, and done, or to-do, in progress, and done columns, which would sort of the basic what I would expect, I guess, right? So when an issue is closed, it moves to the done column. So this isn't too dissimilar from, scoped labels and configuring a board in GitLab. But let's create a brand new column here, and we'll kind of do some GitLab-y product development flow steps. We'll just call it product validation. No preset. We'll go create column. I want to move this column in front. Okay, just click and drag it. So let's see if I can add some automation to it. Manage automation. So it looks like I can only go off of preset. Choose preset to enable progress tracking, automation, and better context sharing with your product. So it's interesting how limiting it is. I guess I would have expected to be able to configure this a little bit more, because this is really the same options I have in the actual to-do column. Maybe I need to actually start putting some issues in here to see. So we'll leave that there for now. I'm going to archive this as well. So let's actually go to a repo and let me initialize a new repo here so I can actually have something to like open a pull request against. So test, public private, go ahead and initialize that, create repo. Cool. So back to my projects, I'm also going to, well, that's interesting. Where's my project? It's documentation. Okay, where is my project? So it's curious. So I'm assuming what happened there was I was in the plan test repo and I went to the project for that repo, and it doesn't have a project because that's their level of organization. But if I go to like the parent container, which is just my account instance, it does have the project. So that's an interesting piece of context as we think about improving our GitLab's groups and projects organization. So, curious. So let's go ahead and create some issues. So this is where I get confused, and I'm interested to see what this is going to look like. So I clicked a plus, which is a card. I don't believe this is going to be an issue, but we're going to say, issue 1, design. Let's call that. So this is a card, and it'll allow me to convert it to an issue, which is curious. So what GitHub has done here is basically kind of create, if you're in a fresh project and you're not using you haven't sort of imported a bunch of issues, it kind of gives you this like Trello card model, which I suppose is interesting depending on how teams want to organize themselves. If you're using this, like a card is a different type of an issue, effectively. I mean, it's not an issue in GitLab parlance, but in terms of like a collection of a key value and some metadata about it, it's like, that's kind of it. But it's just a node, it's just text, where an issue has more data. So I guess that's kind of the key distinction, is that it's a very limited version. So let's actually just convert this to an issue. I see. So then it wants you to, if it's going to be an issue, it has to be tied to a repository, which is interesting. So now if I go, I'm just curious, now if I go to my repo, I go to projects, still no project, but I have an issue. And then it gives me some of those. It gives me the projects that it's connected to. Assign these labels, milestone, link, pull requests. Yeah, okay, got it. So that makes more sense now. So for the sake of simplicity here, I'm actually going to go create a new project inside of the repo path instead of at the top level there, just so it's probably going to be a bit easier for me to map these things. We'll call this plan project. Create project. Okay, so this is interesting. When I created this project, it doesn't actually give me that sort of preset group of columns. So I guess I'll do this. I'll call this backlog. It's giving me those presets as an option, but it doesn't pre-configure the automation, so whatever. I'll go ahead and do that. So issues newly added, and then I want to put a pull request there. So I want to see what happens when a pull request shows up on this board, if that's what it's intending. Call this in progress. Move issues here. What's interesting is I would have expected like me to configure like a label or some mechanism, status field, workflow state, something or other to move it here. I guess it's the only way to do it is when you manually do it. We'll get into this in a second and see. In progress, we'll say this is in test. Also kind of an in progress column, and then we'll go done. Say move issues here and they're closed, and PRs are merged. Okay, let's go back to issues, and I'm going to create a few more issues here. I'll call this Backhand work. It's kind of interesting that like I have an issue that's tied to the repo, but it's not connected to a project. At least I don't think it is yet. So like, does that mean I have to go manually add each issue to every project? Let me see if I can do that in bulk, but it just seems like, shouldn't it always be attached to a project in some way? Let's go, next one is, let's call this like, when I clicked there, oops. going to do one more issue just so we have a few to play around with. Okay, so back to my issues. Here they all are. Let's see if I can like bulk add them to a project. Label my assign. So I can bulk assign. I can create milestones, labels, mark as open or closed, but I can't move them to a project. Are you kidding me? Let's go into the project itself and see if I can say. Well, so here they all are. Interesting. So then I guess I can do it this way. But like, how come? Okay, doesn't make that much sense. I would have expected when I create the issue for it to automatically get added to the backlog because I have that automation turned on. Because it says, move issue here when it's newly added. Issues are movement was added to this project. Okay. Well, I guess I'll just do it manually. This would be tedious if I actually had a lot of issues. It was a real project. Okay, so then let's say we're gonna move a couple things in progress. Say the backend works in test. Okay. Let's go ahead and go back to the repo, and I'm going to go make an edit here, and I want to see if I could get an MR to show up in that. New branch. Those changes. Just going to open a pull request. Basing off of master with my branch. So I guess it does expect you to add a project. So this is the project. Yeah, that's the project that I need. Create this pull request. Okay. Cool. So let's go back to the project. This is interesting that it's combining MRs and issues in the same board. You know, I guess if, say, I was actually editing a file that was, say, the release post item, like, I would expect these to be linked in some way, but it's interesting they put them there. So then what happens if I, like, moved this? Does it do anything to, like, it doesn't look like it does anything to the pull request. Let's just merge this. Okay, and let's go back to my project. Okay, so then it does move it all the way over there automatically. Okay, so it's kind of what I would expect to happen at the automation. Let me add some labels here and see, because one of the things I would have expected is that I could, you know, configure how the issues move through these columns based on some of this automation, based on other data, metadata about the issue or, say, the pull request. So let me just add some labels here. Create a label. Can I call this? Create a new label, release post. Okay. Go back. Create a new label. Okay, let's see then if I go back to projects, plan project. So I'll show my labels on the board here. Let's go back to my automation and see if I can. Okay. Yeah, so I guess I would have hoped that I could, now that I have some labels, that I would see those labels show up. I think just opinion here. This is pretty weak from an actual planning perspective. Like, you can't really create custom workflows with this if you're using GitHub issues and projects. Like, there are often different workflow steps that organizations need that are not as simple as a bunch of issues in 3 different columns or manually move through 3 different columns. It is nice that you can edit the issue here on the right in this column, but it's very, like, if you just visually look at this, like, the board is massive, and then this sort of fly out container is just small, relatively speaking, and it lacks a bunch of detail that I would, I guess, expect, or I guess pieces of metadata that I would expect to edit. I suppose if there are truly multiple people collaborating on a single issue, maybe that becomes a little bit more verbose. But it still feels like I would have a usage pattern of still going into the issue itself. See, like, I don't see that history on the pullout, right, on this column. So I just would expect to have to go into the issue quite a bit. But then if I'm working off of the issue and I change a piece of metadata, say milestone or label or assignee or what have you, that it could automatically make a change to what column it shows up on the board. But it really just looks like that automation is strictly limited to if something's new and something's closed. Like, that's it. I don't believe there's a concept of epics or other sort of planning artifacts. Issue types, for example, inside of GitHub. Let's go and just double check to make sure they didn't add that recently. Yeah, no. So, like, I can't, say create a swim lane or something on my board, sort of organize, say I want a swim lane for MRs and I want a swim lane for issues. Like, I can't do that. Now, what is interesting, and what it looks like they have spent some time on, let me actually go create a new project, is if you were to sort of create this board for MRs or PRs, GitHub. Board template. Let's try this with reviews because we're going to create a poll. I want to create a pull request board here. So, because it's GitHub and they're haven't really been a leader in planning tools and agile software development tools, but they are a leader in SCM and pull requests and things, code review. I kind of understand the positioning of this, I guess, in that context. So what I did was I created an automated Kanban board for what it looks like, I think you put issues on this, but it's really designed for managing MRs or PRs. And it created the automation automatically for me, which is cool. But let's see what it did. So move issues here. Move pull requests here and newly added. Okay, let's just see. Got it. So issues are, so the way they have this structured is issues are in the to-do column, show up there. In progress are merge requests or pull requests. So any pull requests that are newly added or reopened. review in progress. So pending approval by the reviewer, approved by the reviewer, and then I assume this just is merged. Yep. Okay, cool. So let's go and create a couple more. I mean, this is interesting as a visualization tool to see our MRs. I mean, we should take some notes from this as we extend boards and our boards capabilities. But let me go and open up a couple MRs here. New branch. Pull request. I'm gonna go ahead and create a couple of them with my README, just for the sake of speed. See what happens when there's like a merge conflict and you're trying to map these things across the board. Okay, let's go back to my new project here. Pull request board. So again, like, I created pull requests on the repo, the only repo in this namespace. I guess I didn't add them to the project when I created them. Let me just do this again. I would have expected that board to be full of my new MRs, but we'll try this again. Really great MRs here. Branch. Testing MR board. One more. Yeah, so it's interesting that, like, if you don't, it expects you to manually apply the project. Like, I wonder if there's a setting, like the enterprise accounts, that like force a user to apply the project linking issues. So let's see what this does. So I can link an issue to a pull request using a keyword. So let's do that in the next. Let's do that in a new pull request. So let's actually go create an issue. Let's clean this up first. So let's go back to my pull request board. I'm gonna add these. I guess like they're all here, right? Because they're adding a line. I thought I had 3 of them. Is open. Did I not? Oh, I didn't create this one. It's disappointing that's not real time. Like, if I'm filtering for cards here, it doesn't give me that card I created. Oh, but I guess it added it. Okay, fine. Because I added the project, that makes sense. All right, let me go create a new issue. Again, interesting. This is a note, not an issue. I guess I can. Let's actually we'll create an issue the old-fashioned way here. Should be closed. Submit new issue. Add it to my project. I'm going to use that keyword. So it says this should closes number 10. Okay, I see. So update comment. So my expectation here is when I merge this test update readme mr, that it closes number 10. But let's do this. So let's say, let's open this mr. I guess I have to click here. Let's add a reviewer. I'm the only person on this account. I guess I assign it to myself. See if that changed anything on the board here. Nope. I'm just curious. Okay. So basically, if let's see if I can like open a thread on this without having to create another account. Projects. It's interesting. So like I opened a review on this pull request. Sure I did it right. So like I guess, yeah, because I'm the author of the pull request. I can't like basically leave an open review action item, so it's not going to automatically move this for me. I can take this one step further in a minute and do that and see if I can create another account. But let's see if at least we merge this and it goes in to that column. Resolve, merge. All right. So my expectation here is that MR shows up right. And it looks like it also moved that issue to that column as well. It's interesting that icon is like an alert icon. I guess that's just their closed icon. It's like closed. Yeah, interesting icon choice. Personal preference. Okay, well, let's pause here. I might go try and create another account. But it kind of is interesting, I guess, at a high level, like that you could set up this MR board as a nice visual representation of MRs for the team, right? So, you know, if you're using labels, I assume, yeah, so you could say filter to a label. Apparently it doesn't let me select that label. Oh, there we go, label, you know, whatever, bug. So that's nice. I can actually see a lot of value in that, but I might fiddle around a little bit more and go create an account. I will save you the video watch time on that, and I'll pop this back in a second. All right, back at it. So I was going to add a member, like my personal account, to this account so I could demonstrate some of the automation features, but what I ended up doing, or what I was stumbling upon, is their Teams feature. So I thought I'd kind of walk through this a little bit. So I think it's actually interesting. Solution, workaround to their sort of projects and groups, repositories attached to projects sort of challenge that that was confusing to me earlier. I don't think this solves it, but it's an interesting, I guess, construct to organize things that we should look at and evaluate a little bit deeper. But what I did was I did create a team here. It's pretty easy to create, but here's this team sort of homepage, and they let you have this sort of discussion board. I created one discussion item that was just team metrics. I think this is actually kind of cool because it lets you have these like unstructured, not tied to an issue discussions and updates. And this is useful if, say, as the example I was giving here, like, hey, I wanted to share some metrics from the last month or something like that. You can pin things. This is kind of like a Slack room, but it's your sort of team board. It has this like canonical URL, which I think is nice. What I was hoping for was the ability to like manage the projects and members attached to this team. So I'm going to add a member from this. I'm going to add my personal email address here. That's me. Invite. So I'll go log in elsewhere and see if I can join this one. And then projects, I wanted to add a project. Now I was confused at first here, but what it looks like it's doing is it's not creating a new project necessarily. It's adding a project. So if I go to plan, like here's the plan project that I created earlier. And so now this plan project, I guess the team has access to it. It's unclear to me like if that project now belongs. This wasn't the board one. This was the MR board. This was our project. This was just the generic issue project. It's unclear to me if like this belongs to the team now, which is kind of interesting. Repositories. I go to repositories well, and I can go to there's my repo that I created. So I add that repository to the team. Now the team has access to that. So it's kind of cool in that it's a solution to collect sort of disparate objects across the system into a single view. So say I did have a structure where, you know, I had distinct teams that wanted to track issues differently and repos differently. Like you could sort of hack this together in a way where the team was the team view here was like your collection of the stuff that the team owns and is responsible for, without having to sort of map, I guess, challengingly map the relationships between those things. Like as far as I can tell, that repo still belongs to the project. It sort of didn't add a team path here. It just kept it in the same place, but now there's one place I can go to and I see that repo, which is nice. So projects, I want to see if I can add that project from the repo now. So like, let's look at call it PR. That's kind of interesting that like I have a project under the repo. But it doesn't show up as a team project. So if I go to my teams, I go to this team, go to projects, add a project. Let me go back to here really quick. So go just plan-test. It doesn't give me that option. Only organization projects you've added can be added. So it's kind of broken, to be honest, because if I did create a project, like a project at the organization level can't map individual issues that belong to a single repository. So it can only map like the high level projects, sort of at this level. Which I can have issues attached to those. I can create issues via the notes, but like if I wanted to pull this in, this is just confusing what what belongs to what, right? Like I just pulled all these issues into that high level project. Just make sure I still can access this. Yeah, so I guess the way I would set this up then is you would want to create, you basically wouldn't want any projects at the repository level, even though issues belong to a repository, but you'd want to create your boards, which are really just what GitLab calls, or GitHub, excuse me, calls projects. You'd want those at that sort of organization level. So, you know, if you were structuring this for a larger organization, like it would be a project per team probably, or maybe multiple projects for a single team, and then you have the teams kind of organize them so you have that single view, right? And then you'd probably, it's the tricky thing though, is like, what if you had you had a sort of a service-oriented architecture where you had many repos for different services. You didn't have a monorepo. Where do you put your issues? Like, do you put them in a different, like in an empty repository for that project? Like that's kind of an interesting, I don't know, thought exercise to figure out how you'd set this up in a reasonable way. But that's kind of an interesting side note is that they have this Teams feature. And they let you create sub-teams within that too. So you could create an organizational structure in here that gives visibility and access to different items, but you still have this weird problem where issues belong to a given repository, and it's kind of hard to understand where those issues belong and how to move them around. So let me pause here, and I'm going to go pull my other account into this organization. All right, last bit for today. I managed to pull my personal account into this GitHub organization, and I got the automation working. So I'm going to walk through that quickly, and then kind of compile this and share some notes. But to start off, and I did this already with one MR, but I'm going to go ahead and work off of this MR. So I have this testing MR board MR, and what I'm going to do is add a reviewer. This is my personal account. I'll go ahead and assign it to myself too, just so you can see how that works. And so then if I go to my personal account, what you'll see, should see a notification, maybe. Yep. So review requested. I'll click the add my review button. We'll request some changes and say, you know, needs improvement. Submit review. And you'll notice in real time, actually, it went ahead and moved that particular MR into review in progress, which is great. So if I go to that MR, I'm going to open up in a new window because you can't really do everything from that sidebar view. You'll see needs improvement. So it doesn't show it in line, but very cool. If I go back to this, I should be able to edit that. That's the quick reply. I was trying to see if I can improve it. But I guess that's not obvious. It does print the automation there, which is nice. So, yeah. So what I'll do here is I will also approve this one and then submit that review and refresh. In theory, what should happen is it should move over, but maybe not. Approve these changes. Maybe my approved by reviewer. I'm moving through with a minimum number of required approved reviews. So maybe this is not working because my README file doesn't have a required approver. So approval is not necessary, but I did it anyway. So there you go. That's quick. But the automation seems to be working for these MRs, which is great. You know, another way to think of this automation, though, frankly, and this is true for the issue view as well, is, you know, if you're comparing this to GitLab, for example, is it's really about the board scope, right? So if I go to GitLab, or the column scope, excuse me. So if I go to GitLab and I go to, you know, look at a board, say for, you know, gitlab.org, I'm able to configure the list settings. And I'm able to configure a list based on a label, assignee, or milestone. So you could effectively achieve the same thing. I'm thinking forward when we build MR boards, you know, we'll be able to achieve a very similar outcome with the primitives that exist, right? So the automation, you know, we could phrase it as automation, but we already have a lot of these capabilities because we allow you to apply scope via label, assignee, etc. You know, to each column in the board. So when we go build MR boards, we should consider what the scope for a given column is, right? So we have label, assignee, milestone. Maybe there needs to be MR status as a potential scope as we work through that. So anyway, thanks for watching all this. Pretty raw, but hopefully got some value, and I'll capture some notes and try and outline what I learned.